bienvenue. Welcome this evening. Thank you very much for coming. This is exciting to have everybody here. This is part of the Sister Cities lecture series for the Alexandria Cologne Sister Cities, and so we're very excited all the time to have in a few months a nice presentation to bring a community together. So I just wanted to say a few words about Sister Cities International because I found a lot of people don't know what it is. It started after World War II. Eisenhower decided that there really needed to be a bridge of communities internationally to kind of help future conflict. He thought that it would be better to maybe go people to people, person to person, instead of only government to government. So in fact, that's what we are. We're a representative of 17 appointed members of the citizen community here in Alexandria. So we're not an official city employees, but just volunteers that try to put Francophile type of activities together. So you are here for our lecture series. Just yesterday, we were excited to confirm that our next lecture series will be January 22nd. And Francois Furstenberg is a professor at Johns Hopkins University, and he just released a very interesting book that I believe is in the Washington Post right now for a review. It's called When the U.S. Spoke French, and it chronicles 5 refugees from the French Revolution that came to the United States. So that should be interesting. You'll be getting more notice about that if you sign up for our listserv, which you'll find the paper downstairs if you didn't already. I just wanted to make a few announcements. That was the lecture. The other one is if you're interested in French language lessons, we don't have a room or a date yet, but sometime in the new year, one of our members is a French teacher. She runs FrenchinDC.com, and she's willing to offer her services to benefit our student exchange program. So if you're interested in it, we'll get you more details when we have them, but please find one of our members for more information. We also have a student exchange. It's for 9th, 10th, and 11th graders. If anybody you know fits that profile and is interested in French, please contact one of our members. And finally, our D-Day event is really our big event that we started 4 years ago. And that will be June 6th is, in fact, the anniversary of D-Day, but we have a lecture the Thursday before, which is June 4th, right here at the Lyceum. And on Market Square with World War II memorabilia and reenactors and music. It's getting bigger and better every year, so mark your calendar for that as well. It's so exciting to have all these events to tell you about, but I do want to move on to tonight's presentation. Tom is one of our committee members. We are very glad to have him as a member of our committee for the last 2 years. He is a graduate of the University of Wisconsin, Madison, with a bachelor's and master's degree in European history. He served for 24 years in combat and staff positions in the U.S. Army. While in the Army, Lieutenant Christensen taught European history at the United States Military Academy, West Point, and the military history at the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. He also taught military history at the University of Wisconsin while he was serving as the professor of military science. For 9 years after military retirement, he and his wife Darlene conducted battlefield tours of European World War I and World War II sites in Italy, France, and Germany. He later joined the government service and has served as historian at the 63rd Regional Support Command in Moffett Field, California, and then as the U.S. Army Military Police historian at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. Since October 2012, he is a senior historian at the Office of the Secretary of Defense History. He and his lovely wife, Darlene, who has been a great support for our committee as well, live here in Alexandria, and he's just a fun, very interesting, wonderful guy who has a ton of information, so I really encourage you to think of questions after his lecture, and you'll get a good response, I'm sure. I think that is everything. We have a lot of stuff that our committee does, so check our website out and sign up for more information.
that introduction, I better be good. First of all, let me again say thank you and again emphasize this is an Alexandria Comp sister city event. We're very, very fortunate, I think, also to have in Alexandria Comp as our sister city. A couple of thank yous, specifically and mostly this presentation. I need to thank Dr. Anthony Crane back there, who's running the projector. We worked together in the Office of Secretary of Defense History, and Tony did most of the hard work here, so I'm just up here talking. But I really appreciate that, Tony. The other person I want to thank is my wife, Darlene. She's already been noted, but she shared with me many of the battlefields and museums, tolerated them in some cases because I sometimes couldn't get enough. And we went from Verdun to the Meuse Argonne to Normandy, et cetera, so I'd like to thank her for this opportunity also. I want to emphasize before I get started that the purpose of this lecture tonight is in no way intended to glorify war. In fact, it's just the opposite. You'll see that this is the most horrific war when it comes to an experience by human beings, I think, that the world has ever suffered. All war is cruel and horrible, of course, but the First World War was indeed horrific in many cases as far as human suffering, both physically and mentally. Rather, though, this is a lecture that commemorates and remembers those who were in this war. And they were in this war not oftentimes by choice, although many volunteered early on because, of course, the war was going to be over by Christmas, remember, in 1914. Some couldn't wait to get over there. Of course, in the United States, and I'm going to cover this later, doesn't come in until 1917, but many Americans, believe it or not, when the Canadians joined almost immediately in the war effort in 1914, many Americans went to Canada and joined. More than 60,000 Americans served in Canadian forces in World War I. 60,000. And of course, many of those soldiers, American soldiers, are buried overseas in Canadian and Commonwealth cemeteries. And I think tonight, because we have the sister city of France, it's especially to commemorate the French and the suffering of the French people. Because almost the entire war, 90% of the war was fought in France and portions of Belgium with French-speaking peoples. And they suffered the most. And when I get to the casualties, you're going to see, and this is incredible, that 75% of all French combatants were either killed or wounded. 75%. We as Americans think we suffered horrendous casualties in World War I. They were significant, and I'll get to that later in the presentation. But our percentage was 8%. The French suffered 75%. It also causes us to stop and think about what happened in May 1940, when the French seemed to give up so easily. We might have more of an appreciation, I think, for the French suffering in the First World War and what it meant later on. So let's move along. This is the first slide. It has to do with the Schlieffen Plan. The Schlieffen Plan was a plan by the Germans in which they were going to invade France, and it was designed far sooner than the war occurred by a guy called von Schlieffen, obviously. And it was to sweep, and his motto was, "Let the last Prussian grenadier rush the channel with his right sleeve," okay? And that meant they were going to come and make a swing in toward Paris. And it was a design plan because they knew they had to attack and gain France before the Russians were going to attack from the other side, because during the Entente phase, the Triple Entente was France, Russia, and Great Britain. They needed to knock out France and then be able to put their soldiers against the Russians because they thought it was going to take the Russians longer to mobilize. Well, we're going to see that that plan didn't quite work. It came close, but it didn't quite work. There's a lot of close calls in the First World War. Next slide, please. You can see that Austria-Hungary, obviously, is a polyglot nation. All of this, we think of Austria as a small country today, around Vienna. But at the time, right before the First World War, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire was not only Austria, Hungary, parts of Poland, all of Czechoslovakia, Bosnia, Croatia, Yugoslavia, everything that we can see on the map there. So it's a tremendous area. And of course, the war is going to start in that area. Next slide. And it's going to start again with the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. Most of you are familiar with that. He goes to visit in Sarajevo. He is met there by a team of assassins, Serbian Slavs. Of course, the Serbians were backed by the Russians. Serbian Slavs want to knock off Gavrilo, or knock off Franz Ferdinand. And of course, the guy that eventually kills Franz Ferdinand that day is none other than Gavrilo Princip. He's the guy on the right. Gavrilo Princip actually saw the motorcade go by in the morning and chickened out the first time. He didn't draw his revolver, didn't throw his grenade. But somebody else did throw the grenade farther down the road. And the Archduke actually saw it coming and put up his hand. It bounced off his hand, bounced on the street, and blew up. And the car following him had some serious injuries based upon that grenade. Those people were immediately taken to the hospital. Franz Ferdinand went and did his appointment. It's amazing that the mayor of Sarajevo had a prepared speech, and he continued, regardless of what had happened just previously, saying, "We in Sarajevo all are very, very happy to see you." Okay? Probably not a good thing. Franz Ferdinand didn't think that was a very good joke, but he went on like nothing had happened. Well, anyway, Franz Ferdinand was supposed to go to an appointment, and instead he decides he's going to go visit the people in the hospital, those that were injured in that car from the morning grenade throw. And he told everybody except the most important guy, the driver. And off they go. And at a certain point, everybody sees they're going the wrong way, and everybody's waving their hands, and the driver goes, "Oh, you got to turn around. We're going to go down over here." And so the driver turns down this one street, and just by chance, Gavrilo Princip happens to be sitting there, standing there, actually bemoaning the fact that he had chickened out in the morning, and he, literally by chance, the car pulls right up to him and starts to turn around. And at that point, Gavrilo Princip regained some courage, or whatever you want to call it, jumped up on the running board, fired into the Archduke and his wife Sophie. The Archduke said, "Sophie lived for me." She did not. He did not. So what happens is a chain of events in which the Russians back the Serbs, the Austrians back are mad, obviously. They mobilize. The Russians start to mobilize. What happens then is with the Russians mobilizing, the Germans start to mobilize, getting the forces ready. When the Germans start to mobilize, the French start to mobilize. Blah, 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 blah. What happens is that the war literally, within 2 weeks to 4 weeks, falls into the bloodiest war in human mankind up to that time. Okay? So you have the First World War starting. And the major powers, of course, are the English, the French, and the Russians on one side, and the Germans and the Austrians on the other side. Next slide, please. Here you can see the initial euphoria. In France especially, again, this is, we're the sister city with France. In France especially, most of you have been to Paris and seen the Place de la Concorde and all the statues of the French provinces. The French had been beaten by the Prussians in 1870, rather badly beaten, and very quickly. And they had actually, and the Germans had taken Alsace-Lorraine away from France and incorporated it in their country. And they had put a shroud over the province of Alsace-Lorraine in the Place de la Concorde. All the French provinces are there in statuettes. They had put a shroud over. And there was one thing on every Frenchman's lips: revanche. They wanted revenge. They were going to take it back. And so there was a spirit of militarism, and it existed in every country. And so when a call went out, people joined up. People couldn't wait to join up. Everybody was afraid that they were going to miss it. Next slide. There in Munich, you can see there was an Austrian who happened to be in Munich at the time, and his name was Adolf Hitler. And he's in the, if you've been to Munich, you know where I'm talking about, Feldherrenhalle. He's there in the plaza, and he's cheering with everybody else. And of course, he's in the crowd. They found him later in history, and they've circled him. You can see he's quite happy about the war. He does become a corporal, of course. Next slide. Okay, the early war was a war of movement. It looked like it was going to be like the War of 1870, all over again. The Germans attacked, and they attacked, and they attacked. They actually attacked for almost 3 days straight without sleeping. And later, we're going to, the next slide, please, Tony. You're going to see, again, they get almost all the way to Paris. Next slide. But then we have what's called the miracle of the Marne. The French stopped them at the Marne. And you'll see a lot of movies how French taxi cabs from Paris sent soldiers out to the front. And that occurred, but that wasn't the real miracle. What happened was, and recent historians have only come upon this, is that they realized that the Germans had attacked for 3 or 4 days straight, had gotten almost all the way to Paris, and were literally tired. Think about it. Have you ever been up for 3 or 4 days carrying a pack, marching? That was the miracle of the Marne, almost as much as the French resistance. But the French do resist, and they start building a front then. Next slide. Here you can see it again. Is there another slide, Tony? Next one? No. Okay, back up. Oh, they start building a front that extends in trench warfare all the way from Paris to the North Sea. And what happens is every side is trying to outflank the other. Just as the other side goes to the right flank, the other one fills in, and so forth. Until the front now extends all the way from the North Sea all the way down to Switzerland. A series of trenches. And you can see the trenches here. Both British soldiers, French soldiers. Very, very, very difficult life. I'm going to talk a little bit about trench warfare in this life, but understand that it is a war. It is a war of stagnation. It is a war in which there is no movement, because you have new weapon systems entailed. Weapon systems that the forces that are using them don't know exactly what they can do and what they can't do. Next slide. You can see again the trench warfare. Remember, when the Germans come in, they're all the way almost to Paris. They're pushed back a bit, but the line is established, and the line always runs for about 3.5 to 4 years, almost 4 years in the war, from the North Sea to Switzerland, but it always runs through Belgium and France. Keep that in mind. The war is not in Germany. It's in France. The Germans are in France the entire war, and in a good part of France. And so it's up to the French and the English, their English allies, to push them back. The English, of course, joined by the South Africans and most importantly, the Canadians. And that pushback occurs very, very slowly. In fact, so slowly that the Germans counterattack and take back anything that the enemy, or that the British and French take. And so what you have is a war in which there is little movement, in which machine gun fire covers the entire battlefield, in which artillery fire covers the entire battlefield. Imagine a battle, one day, 3 million artillery shells. 3 million. And we're talking about on a front that might be from here to Bethesda, Maryland. 3 million shells are expended in one day. And remember that every time an artillery shell hits in these days, the killing radius is 25 to 50 meters. Now, if you are in a trench, you're safe. because the shell explodes and the shrapnel goes out. If you're standing up outside the trench, you're not. But many of the shells, when you shoot 3 million, hit the trenches too. And so the trenches cave in, etc. And so you're going to have trenches there for the entire time. And it's not just one row of trenches. There's usually 4 rows of trenches, joined by what they call communication trenches. And so in this war of no movement, even if you do take by your attack the first trench, guess what? You've got 3 more to go. Okay? And the enemy is probably going to counterattack. And if you lose, as an example, some of the French attacked and they lost 90% of their men in the first attack in 17 to 19 minutes. 90% casualties. And so even if you do take that trench, what do you do then? You're getting ready for the counterattack, which is going to come and probably push you back out or kill the 10% that made it. So it's a war of stagnation. People are sitting there under horrific conditions. Next slide. Here you can see an artillery shell that hit inside the trench area. I think, again, World War I is the most horrific of wars as far as conditions. Trenches would fill with water. They would have hand pumps to pump the water out. Trench foot is just what it means. It means that you're constantly in water because you were in the trenches. Trench water would be anywhere from 6 inches to a foot deep. Your feet would always be wet. And then you had to deal with other wonderful items, like lice. 95% of the people suffered from lice.